Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Emily Hiles, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is leading aircraftman James Anning. Today, we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the sinking of the HMAS Armidale. HMAS Armidale was commissioned in Sydney on the 11th of June 1942, one of 56 corvettes commissioned for service in the Royal Australian Navy during the Second World War. Named after Australian towns, corvettes were lightly armed and very crowded. Originally designated as Australian minesweepers, they were all-rounders, performing everything from anti-submarine and mine warfare duties to sea rescue, convoy escort, and supply and evacuation. In late November 1942, Armidale and her sister ship Castlemaine were assigned to evacuate troops and civilians from Betano Bay, Timor, while delivering supplies and a relief contingent. The corvettes sailed from Darwin just as Japanese aircraft flew over the harbour, and the next morning they were located by a Japanese reconnaissance aircraft which they were unable to shoot down. The two corvettes then survived repeated air attacks before reaching Betano, by which time they'd missed their rendezvous with the auxiliary patrol boat Kuru, which had already sailed for Darwin with Portuguese refugees. They found Kuru 110 kilometres off Timor, and the refugees were transferred to Castlemaine, which then returned to Darwin. On the 1st of December 1942, as Kuru and Armidale continued the operation in daylight, they came under attack from Japanese dive bombers and Zero fighters. At one point, a torpedo passed over the bridge before hitting the water. Just after 3 p.m, Armidale was hit by two torpedoes in quick succession. The first slammed into the mess deck, killing many of the soldiers there, and the second into the engine room. As Armidale began to sink, the Japanese Zeros began strafing runs on survivors in the water. Ordinary sailor Edward Sheehan, who had been wounded in the initial attack, strapped himself into one of Armidale's guns and opened fire. He forced one Zero to crash into the sea and damaged at least two others until he finally went down with the Armidale. He would later posthumously receive a Victoria Cross for this action. The loss of life on the Armidale was the highest for any corvette in the Second World War. Only 49 of the 149 men on board survived the ordeal. Today, we remember HMAS Armidale. We pay our respects to the men and women commemorated here on the Roll of Honour and to the survivors who returned home. We warmly welcome Mr. Joe Slutz, representing the Naval Association of Australia. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Toil, our home is girt by sea.
The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where family and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Sub-Lieutenant James Reginald Buckland. James and his twin, Robert Arthur Buckland, were born on the 6th of April, 1920. Two of three sons born to Arthur Roy and Doris Bell Buckland of Sydney. All three of the brothers, James, Robert, and David, would serve for Australia in the Second World War. Only two would return home. James Buckland, known as Jim, was an engineering student who lived in Bellevue Hill in Sydney's eastern suburbs. He was engaged to his sweetheart, Pat Thomas. After the outbreak of the Second World War, Buckland joined the Royal Australian Naval Volunteer Reserve. In September 1941, he was appointed a sub-lieutenant on probation at HMAS Cutter Naval Base on Sydney Harbour. From September 1941, he attended training courses at Rush Cutter in Sydney and HMAS Cerberus near Melbourne. In June, he joined the newly commissioned corvette HMAS Armidale. Buckland served on Armidale as it escorted troop ships between Australia and New Guinea. On the 29th of November 1942, he sailed with Armidale from Darwin to evacuate and resupply troops and civilians from Botano Bay in Timor. Soon after leaving Darwin, Armidale was spotted by Japanese aircraft. It came under a number of Japanese air attacks during its voyage to Timor. On the 1st of December 1942, while making her return voyage, Armidale came under heavy attack from Japanese torpedo dive bombers and Zero fighter aircraft and was sunk in the Timor Sea. Buckland survived the loss of the ship, one of 102 survivors left swimming amongst the floating remains of their sunken vessel. Hope lay in a small Calais float, a damaged motorboat, a makeshift raft, and a badly damaged and partly submerged whaler, which the men were able to refloat and bail. The survivors stuck together on their crafts, but had no idea if authorities knew Armidale had been sunk or if help was on the way. Buckland was on the makeshift raft, which was constructed of floating barrels, broken boats, and wood lashed together by the desperate men. On the 2nd of December, Armidale's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander David Richards, set off with a small party of men on the motorboat in an effort to be sighted by aircraft closer to the Australian coast. 3 days later, in a final desperate attempt to find help, Lieutenant Lloyd Palmer made for Australia on the damaged whaler. Buckland, as sub-lieutenant, was left in charge of the makeshift raft, which was not seaworthy enough to have any hope of being successfully rowed towards Australian waters. Stranded, starving, and without water, all Buckland and the other 27 men on the raft could do was wait and hope they would be found. On the 5th of December, Australian aircraft found the damaged motorboat, and the search for the rest of the survivors of the attack began. Allied aircraft later found the damaged whaler and rescued the men on board. On the 7th of December, an Allied aircraft spotted Buckland and the remaining survivors on their raft about 450 kilometres northwest of Darwin. The following day, a Catalina flying boat flown from Cairns attempted to rescue the men, but due to the rough seas, could not land on the water. Forced to return to land, the crew of the Catalina took a photo of Buckland and the stranded men. Despite a desperate search, this is the last time they were seen. All were lost at sea. James Buckland was 22 years old. His name is listed on the Plymouth Naval Memorial in the United Kingdom, which records the name of nearly 16,000 British and Commonwealth naval personnel of the Second World War who were lost at sea and have no known grave. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Sub-Lieutenant James Reginald Buckland, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow, not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of our director and staff, we thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support of the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.